Alright, another draft physics video production. Such. Sorry about the crickets. This as soon as somebody mentions it, then it distracts you, and you can't hear anything the person's saying. So I understand, I empathize, but it's a little hot, so I'm not closing the window. Anyway, so too bad. Sorry. It worked out. Anyway, so some comments, and I could probably make a video out of the minimal amount of commenting there is, but anyway, probably could do it. Alright, so this is apparently a joke. Don't you know that interstellar is solid science because they enlisted the help of a scientist to make it accurate? I don't even know why they solicited his help. I mean, this is kind of a project he wanted to do kind of thing. That's what makes it all the worse, is that it's like he has some passion for all this crap. This is the gravitational wave guy, whatever the fuck his name is. And you'd think, just out of respect for his science, that he wouldn't want to cheat all over the place. And the whole thing is a horrible cheat. So in this whole controversy about even the legitimacy or the integrity of the science of gravitational waves, the slim margins of error here, the whole thing like we've done it bull kind of shit, you think in that atmosphere they'd have some apprehension going in, because he was working on this before they found gravitational waves, to make sure there was some integrity to the science. And it's so bad, it's like they can't have any understanding of how gravity works at all, to even think that they can come up with some gimmick, like there's some gimmick that's going to break gravity, and it won't be the Newtonian rule that you have to oppose a force with an equal and opposite force. That the only way you get around gravity is to get around that force mechanism and to understand it. And yeah, no, quite obviously, no illustration of any understanding. And even if you were attempting to, let's say, overwhelm gravity, you would at least understand that you don't make your spaceship out of cement, poured cement. You find something else to make it out of. If you're trying to get it into space, obviously you'd want to minimize every single pound. It was just the whole idea that we can move in an hour between time dilations, but somehow you don't have to have either velocity or acceleration. And sometimes you can get velocity without going through the process of acceleration. Because to get into these extreme time dilations, you have to have extreme velocity, and the only way you get that extreme velocity is you're going to have to do it like through acceleration. And the acceleration is going to have to be massive. It would just smash you into pancake, something thinner, paper, whatever, the thinnest thing there is, carbonite or something. Forget it. So the science was just horrible. It was awful, glaringly horrible. And nobody seems at all bothered by that this whole theory they've based their physics on, these premises, and every time they were giving some opportunity to somehow defend this crap, they just cheat all over the place. Okay. I like how love is the key to the fifth dimension or something. Well, the whole ending gets so silly. That you're just like, what is this horse shit all about? Even tapping the Morse code into the gravity, the timing thing doesn't make any sense. The amount of information you're trying to convey is so dense, and you're trying to do it through Morse code. I mean, it's an insane mechanism to use. It's two translations. I mean, you're translating an English language into a bit language. I mean, it's just preposterously inefficient. Insanely inefficient. There should have been a tape recorder or something. Even reels of tape would make more sense than fucking goddamn Morse code that somehow makes a watch do the same thing over and over again forever, which also doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's just so bad. I mean, no connection to the rules of the physical universe, completely a dream sequence. The whole movie was a dream sequence. I mean, suspend reality. And again, a prominent physicist, a Nobel Prize winning physicist, has his fingerprints all over something that looks like just complete, made up, mushy, baby, fantasy nonsense. It doesn't bother anybody. It's clearly it bothers some other people, but so very, very few. That's science. That really is the face of science. I mean, even Feynman went on these wacky, fantasy voyages where he wasted a whole bunch of time trying to prove that one electron could be running the entire universe by dimensional transport or something. Why? Why would you waste your time with that nonsense? The electrons over here are not the same ones as the ones over here. It's pretty much a guarantee. It's just too stupid. Alright, anyway. So then he says, another comment. Right or wrong, I like your speculation about how heavy metals may act as a sink for impurities in the glass. I thought of a second idea. It's all about crystals. This whole idea of transmitting light has to do with having a consistent matrix, geometry for the energy to travel through. I was thinking about domains and magnetism and different things, and crystals are like that. They get to a certain size and the crystal starts to break down and a new crystal has to start, kind of thing. It has to create off a new facet, a new surface. And so I was thinking that maybe the heavy metals are a kind of a lubricant for that process, so they allow the crystals to get bigger than they normally would get because they line on the surfaces or something like that. But I just don't have enough information to say, oh yeah, no, that can't be true, or that can be, or so I don't know enough about the chemistry, frankly, to speculate. So I'm sure there's an answer on Wikipedia or something about why the lead just makes it harder, or it makes it harder is a funny word though, but that may be true, right? I mean, I'm not sure, but lead crystal, I don't think it has the same sag problem over time. So the crystals are more rigid, so they don't slump over the few hundred years, but I don't know. Alright, slightly Bob the Fly, slightly off topic, but I think your comments on telling other people not to lie are the most effective tool you have to teach physics. I think bringing up the point that this is all like a credulous argument. There's a point where there's just incredulous. It's all those kind of words for credibility, and there's just no sense that you get that anybody's worried about their credibility. They can just, they can mix solid stuff we've done millions of times that we know to be true with stuff like dark matter that they just don't have really any reason to believe this fantasy ghost matter exists, and that it's just so obviously a convenient contrivance. I mean, it's just so obvious that you create this magic matter that only does the one thing you want it to do and doesn't do anything else. It doesn't have any other detectable property except to solve your mathematical problem. I mean, that's so bad. And so lies make everything foggier. Distortion, hyperbole, exaggeration. So let's put all those things in the category of lie. Because intelligent people, let's call each other intelligent for a minute. Intelligent people know they're the same thing. That when when you're hyperboling or when you're exaggerating the strength of some argument, and you know when you're doing it pretty much. So it's really kind of a willful distortion, when you play this game, that somehow you have really solid evidence when, you have incredibly weak evidence. But you're just playing a little lawyer trick, you're just trying to keep people's eye off the ball. So you're trying to do exactly that. You're trying to fog the atmosphere so you can distort reasonableness. Like the OJ jury thing even. I mean, obviously that jury was already decided long before the first words were spoken in the case. They had already decided. But you could see that even if you had a semi-honest jury, that this idea where you can try to distort and make highly significant hard evidence look weak, by creating a bunch of songs, glove doesn't fit, you got to acquit. You make it a jingle, and the jingle sits in people's heads, but the solid thing that's boring and doesn't have a jingle, it just doesn't look like anything. So you can make the, elephant piss seem like a can of Coke. Just because the elephant piss has such a cool label and has such a great jingle. Elephant piss is really... yeah, sorry. No poem for that one. Anyway. So, yes, I sort of agree with your point, I suppose. And I do seem to emphasize this a lot, that the weakness of their evidence and this whole lie, the most proven theory in the history of mankind, the most, it's just the most reliable, blah, 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 all this crap, when they know their math doesn't always work, and it has all kinds of conditions you have to, it has to be round, and it has to be this, and it has to be that, and it has to be all these things, or the formula doesn't work at all. I mean, it's just such a lie to pretend they have some kind of formula that says everything and it has all the pieces in it, when the formula is only doing the obvious thing, and it's saying, well, if you have this much space and you have this many things going through it at this speed, there's a certain rate at which things will get deflected. That's all it's saying. It's it's not doing anything profound. It's not making a profound statement about the universe. It's just making a statement that you could watch on a videotape when you have a dollar sale, at the $10 store or something, and all the ladies show up to buy whatever, crappy Patch dolls. And there's only, the doors are only this big and the ladies are all this big, and the whole thing just turns into a big fucking mess. So anyway, look at all this monstrous stuff. Okay, so this is the guy he's not just gonna give up. Okay. Well, whatever. I'll read this. But, again, this is just such a waste of time. I was not off topic. Of course you were off topic. I mean, pretending that you see some obvious crisis in the sense that, there's all these great conversation that somehow I've isolated from this channel, when I don't know how anybody could really get that impression that there's all these real credible people that I'm offering to pay money to do live rooms, to show up and interact, to even make video exchanges, right? I mean, I can't block video exchanges. You don't see any videos, do you? Do you see anybody doing a debunk video? I don't see any. So this whole thing that somehow I have narrowed the capacity of there to be any interaction on the subject of fundamental physics and fundamental mechanisms, where have I done that? Pirro could make a physics video, but he doesn't, because he knows his physics is trivial. And that I'll show just how trivial his understanding is. Yeah, so and Hofstadter did okay. I mean, frankly, we just had some hostility built into the conversation, so there was no way to, personally interact. But the fact is, he brought up points. I answered the points, some better than others, of course, and blah, 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 and back and forth and all that stuff. I'm just saying that it was way past the point that I had every expectation that Hofstadter would just admit the truth that conventional physics is poorly evidenced, and that our conclusions are way ahead of any horse they have. If they have a horse, the horse is so distant to where they've got their cart that you couldn't even tell it's a horse. That could be a jackrabbit for all they know, because they have they're not even connected to their evidence. They're so far away from it in the sense that they really think Eddington experiment was a great experiment. They don't even know the details of how it's done. They haven't they don't know nothing. They're just saying, oh yeah, well, I believe it. Yeah, they never looked at the evidence. They've never done. I mean, you have to admit that most of these physicists, when they talk about the two-slit experiment, it seems like they've never done the experiment themselves. They've never seen the actual patterns. Anyway, so of course you were off topic, in my opinion. You looked in the camera and directly asked me for an example of a legitimate comment from someone that you blocked, and I provided it. Well, in a sense, you didn't provide it. You provided somebody mimicking somebody else's comment, which is hardly the same thing. But anyway, and I gave you an example which you conceded was a legitimate comment. Well, again, the original commenter might have been legitimate, but as I pointed out, creating a new analogy to argue was kind of counterproductive because we already had 4 analogies in the conversation. You then started moving the goalpost. We never moved. I mean, sorry, I can't give you, in every video I make, I can't give you 10 years of context of history of how I've had to interact on the internet. And so I have to cut everything a little bit short and brief, but I'm sure I pointed in there somewhere the word troll might have come up or some other word. But regardless, if you didn't get the concept, fine. I'm not persecuting you for that. I'm just saying that, you picked poor examples. Not my fault. I mean, they're just poor examples. Accounts that don't even exist anymore. I mean, they're pretty poor examples. You then started moving the goalpost and asked for a brilliant mind. Did you block? What brilliant mind did you block? Well, the point really was, yes, what content provider? You were making the accusation that somehow they would be a continuous source of valuable contribution. The idea wasn't that they made one comment. The idea was what contribution have I stifled? Your argument was, I've stifled and stalled and prevented people from commenting. I've somehow prevented them from making videos, or prevented them from having web pages. I've prevented all this stuff by blocking them from a comment section, when obviously I haven't shut them up by doing that. They have just as much liberty as I have to make videos and to write comments on other people's videos. They could write comments on Piro's videos that I might read if Piro made a video. If somebody made a video response to me, obviously all the blocked people can make comments there. I can't do anything about that, but I can read them and point out how they're all falsely paraphrased. They all contain false quotes. Okay. I don't know these people. That's, again, not my fault, and I really can't give you all the context. And you're expecting me to give you all that context before I make a statement about what my expectations are. So I'm sorry there's some misunderstanding. But yes, my expectation was, you're saying I'm stifling a whole realm of valuable contribution. And so it was never about the fact that, oh, I just didn't pay attention to one comment once. They are YouTube posters. How the fuck would I know their history? Well, if you don't know how YouTube works, the fact that it's being basically run by trolls get to decide the whole interaction in comment sections. I'd say 80% of anything that's back and forth that takes place in comment sections is troll initiated. So you could argue that half the comments on YouTube are just arguments with trolls, and that most of the comments, very rarely are there comments that have rational exchanges between rational points of disagreement. So if you don't know that, then you don't do much YouTubing. You can't scroll through your blocked list and expect me to account for every cunt on there. I'm not expecting you to at all. I'm just making a counter argument. You're accusing me of being grossly reckless and almost intentionally stifling of all these legitimate people with legitimate disagreements. And I was just illustrating how I don't think I've done that. I mean, there certainly, I conceded there are some collateral damages. I've blocked people I didn't intend to block and all kinds of stuff like that. But I'm just saying, you're not going to find Professor Lewin on the list or something. You're not going to find anybody really capable of providing a physics counter argument on that list. Anybody from conventional physics. I certainly haven't blocked anybody defending conventional physics with any kind of civil tone. Alright, expect me to have encyclopedia knowledge of everyone who might have trolled you in the past decade. Well, again, I wasn't really expecting that. I was expecting some understanding that the internet is a filthy, dirty, scummy place. And you should be able to make this argument that somehow I've gone way beyond some scum line, that I'm throwing legitimate, valuable things in the garbage. I already said I agree it's reasonable to block people who are being abusive or dickhead trolls, and who are just wasting my time advocating for their own bullshit. Like I have nothing else to do but debunk every theory ever thought of by a human being, when we know I don't win anything by, beating up retards. Abusive dickhead trolls, so you don't say I'm on their side. I don't know if I said you're on their side. I'm just saying clearly you're throwing an accusation at me that I don't think is really very well evidenced, and I don't think it's true. Okay, to the extent that you implied my recklessness. Again, you could have said, look, maybe you're just, I understand there's a lot of pressure doing this, and there's a lot of aggravations. Maybe you could just be a little more careful. That really wasn't the tone of your accusation. Your accusation was more like, gee, you seem to have this horrible attitude, and you're just trying to silence the opposition. And so that's the accusation I heard, and the accusation I was defending myself against. Let's see. My point was that you block people for the mildest responses. Again, so that's your statement. I don't think you proved that case. Sure, explain to them where you think they are wrong, but if you block everyone for that kind of comment, you're going to run out of respondents. So here he's saying it again. He's just saying the same thing again, as if somehow I haven't blocked people whose responses weren't only poorly phrased, they were conceptually irrelevant or garbage or just a distraction. I mean, you're saying that I'm not making any distinction between giving somebody who has some capacity to understand these subjects and people who have no capacity and are also just distractions. So of course I'm blocking people who are just distractions. They're not malicious. They're not even trolls. But their ignorance is just like hecklers in the audience or something. They're a little drunk. They're, you know what I'm saying? You know, how many spastic kids could you have in the theater and still have the play? Or the concert, right? The music concert, and you have a bunch of spastic kids in the fucking goddamn audience. What is the point where you just walk out? What's the point? I'm just saying. So some of the people that get blocked are getting blocked just because they're a useless distraction. I'm not here to talk about how tall aliens are or some kind of bullshit. It just is a waste of time if that's all somebody's getting out of my videos. You know, and so many of the people are like that, right there. They could be flat earthers who are just, oh, you got great arguments against conventional physics. But they're fucking flat earthers, okay? They're useless. They're going to be nothing but a waste of time. They're so stupid. Okay, conspiracy nuts. I mean, it's like that McGuinn guy. He's a conspiracy nut. It's a waste of your time. He's not stupid. I mean, it's not like he's totally uninformed. But his foundational information is so fucking bizarre and outrageously stupid that anything smart he has is in a boat that's sinking. Okay, but to counter what you implied, I'm not here to do raggy shit. Well, you sort of are. Just basically, you know, I mean, you're just being, I think, uselessly critical, but okay, fine. So on the topics of physics, I have a nephew who has graduated to Oxford. I don't know what exactly that means. He graduated to it? Studying physics. He's starting there in September. Okay, so he's graduated but then going to Oxford. I am happy to ask him some of the questions you've raised for him to bring up to his professors. Like I said, if he's in the early stages of his physics education, his professors are not going to indulge in a conversation because they're just going to assume, well, look, it's all way over your head. You don't understand how QM does its little magic, and you have to wait till your fifth year, your fifth year of physics to get that part. So, yeah. Such as why the anything experiment has not been repeated. Yes, well, just ask the logical question. We have all this technology, and it takes a few $100 camera. It doesn't take much of a telescopic camera from outer space. You don't need a 12-inch lens anymore from outer space. Much smaller. You just need a decent telephoto lens. So why haven't we funded the $20,000 experiment, and put the camera on a satellite we already have up there anyway? Maybe I'm minimizing the cost, but even if it cost $100,000 to validate the most important in Einstein's career, kind of the most important event in his career, yeah. It just does scream, oh, nobody's paying any attention to the details here. Sean Carroll kind of admitted it. Physics doesn't want to have a conversation about the foundational concepts. It has absolutely no interest in, modern physics, in securing foundational concepts. Just none. It's said photons are a wave, photons are Heisenberging, photons are Huygensing. These are all assumptions that are now truths. You can't have a conversation. They've almost done that to dark matter, as spooky, as scary as that is. They've almost made it like we proved dark matter exists, so there's no more conversation about whether the foundations of physics should waste time contemplating matter that's based on some other formula than electrons and protons. That we should just assume the existence of some other whatever fucktons and or dictons and vaginatons or something. Whatever. Since I've found it difficult to get your answers from scientists, list me 3 of your top questions. I'll ask him to put them to his teachers and see what answers he gets, and I'll report back to you. Well, that's generous. Thank you. I appreciate that. You sort of cited one. The how do you explain the image projections in a diffraction gradient, as they call it? It transmits images. How does wave theory explain the transmission of the images? That might be another one. What would happen? What's the path of a single photon going through an interferometer? Draw me the path that the photon takes. A single photon when it goes through the interferometer. Where does it wave function, and where does it collapse, and where does it interfere? Oh, there's so many questions. The whole, again, the radar jamming thing. How come in the radar experiment there doesn't need to be any wave function? You don't have to turn the photon into a wave function. Somehow real solid photons that never went through a slit are interfering with each other. How come they can do that in the radar experiment, but I can't do it with visible photons? Why can radar photons interfere with each other, but light photons can't do it the same way? If I hold 2 flashlights up, I can't get the photons to interfere with each other. How come? All right. Okay, so appreciate it. I'm sorry, I should have read the comment ahead of time, and then I could have had my 3 questions prepared and been ready. But I know I have some in my notebook, but I don't happen to have that here. I have some in my written notes, really, but I don't know if they're the best 3 questions, so maybe I'll list more than 3. I mean, the questions are a good point. I mean, I'm just saying these are questions that just need to be asked. You know, even asking has anyone ever attempted to detect a photon in a 2-slit experiment? Has that experiment ever been performed? Ever? Okay. That whole consciousness thing is such unscientific, I guess he's saying. C is in there instead of an S. I don't know why well, obviously this is another point, right? Is that this is where I used to, years ago, I would argue that isn't it kind of weird that physicists don't show up to fix bad physics on the internet? Why don't they complain about it? Why don't the professors get together and say, look at this horrible video, and that Professor Quantum video, Dr. Quantum video, is so bad, and it appears that physics has never complained and said, gee, that's a terrible representation of the duality problem, because it's premised on all kinds of lies, that somehow there was detectors unplugged and the photons could read our minds, and if we weren't watching, it's Schrodinger cat nonsense. There was never a Schrodinger cat experiment. Nobody ever tried to prove that it's ludicrous to think stuff is in 2 states at once, because we know they're not in 2 states at once. It's just retarded. So it is really bothersome that physics is allowing that misstatement, that somehow we need to participate. The moon isn't there unless somebody's, oh, look at the pretty moon. It's not there until somebody looks at it. I mean, it's just stupid. All right, been unable to measure things so small that happened so quickly that they had to come up with statistics bullshit. Well, I don't have a real bother. I'm not bothered by statistics. The idea, though, that they say they can generalize what happens to 1,000,000 photons and say that's what's happening to each one. Each one is doing what the million is doing as a representation, when obviously the million are, some of them are 1, some of them are 2, some are 3, some are 4, where they're going. And to say, to sit there and say that the single photon is going to all those locations is idiotic, that 1,000,000 single photons went to every location. No. It's just that each photon has a history, and the experiment has a condition. And the condition of the experiment is changing, and the photon's history is different. So the angles come out different for each photon. But they imply that somehow each photon is doing what 1,000,000 photons can do, and it's not doing what 1,000,000 photons can do. Been able to measure. Okay, and the speed thing is so important, because obviously we're moving so fucking slow compared to the real universe. I mean, the real universe, the electrons and the protons, they're having 1,000,000,000 years of life. Okay, of interactions in every second of our perception. I mean, we're seeing their evolution, you could argue, so slowly that it's like one of those cityscapes where you see all the cars moving. Well, slow the frame rate down even more. So speed the frame rate up even more, and you won't even see them as cars, and they'll just be little streaks of light, and that's all they'll be. There won't be any. You won't see anything real anymore. You'll just see artifact, of the reality. And for physicists not to concede, that's a real problem for them, a huge problem. And they're just pretending they overcame this problem of perception. No, they didn't. All right, and not knowing the position of things and shit doesn't allow you to say they take any value. Yeah, I mean, it's really horrible, this whole Heisenberg nonsense, that somehow because we can't measure a photon without disturbing it, without wrecking it, really. You can't measure it without wrecking it. You have to have it hit, you have to actually crash right into it, or you're fucked. There's no little interaction with a photon. Oh, I had half an interaction. That's the whole point of quantum mechanics, is that there's no half interactions, no 3/4 interaction, no little interaction. and they're just denying their own science, their own statistical facts, and pretending that no, it's the it's just this is such bullshit. So because we can't measure it, it doesn't have a condition. Because if I don't see the moon doesn't exist. It's that illogical. I guess they had to invent something to keep universities paying them. I don't really think that was it. I just think, like all of our civilization, it became idiocracy and lazy, and it wanted it all now. This whole expectation, I want to have a career and I want to have kids. I mean, these dualities all over the place. I don't want to take any responsibility for, obligations, the real work it takes. I want to be a professional basketball player and a professional bass fisherman, at the same time. I mean, it's just a bullshit culture, and I think they just got tired of, we haven't solved the problem. Well, let's just make up the solution. Fuck it. It's time to have a solution because we're great and we have solutions. No, we're not losers. Some kind of bullshit like that. Cheers from Argentina. Okay. Grazie and such. A question arises in my mind. Oh, half a day. Orthodox physics has it that angular momentum, which is nasty, is fundamentally a property of its own. Well, I mean, obviously, in my opinion, it's not. Because the only things that have this angular momentum are emergent things. So this is kind of another wave problem. I don't think it's an elemental function. I think it's an emergent function, especially with dipoles, electron, proton, maybe. Complex structures can do this movement of the guts. So it's like you would argue the inside of the earth, if it's molten, that molten crap is moving, but it's moving probably with angular momentum. It's moving in patterns that are efficient to all of the directional changes that take place. So yeah, I mean, I have a window open on angular momentum. So I mean, it's this idea of spin. Okay, so you take one object and you spin it, but you think about the surface has this thing called angular momentum. But really it's about lengthening an object to make angular momentum, and so it's like how big the radius is of the spin is kind of part of the argument. So my argument would be is it's kind of a non-conservative force. Doesn't exist as a force. Okay, that's like centrifugal force. There's no centrifugal force. There's just velocity, and velocity that is equal and opposite will end up being circular. So that's all that's really there, and so it's just but there is a real direction thing, and that something that does this spinning thing can act to violate, let's say, conservation of direction. So I would argue there is no conservation of direction because of this concept of angular momentum, because I can have something circular and I can put the energy in this way, and I can take it out this way. So I can move the energy from energy moving in one dimension to energy movement in the other dimensions. And I can do it for free, essentially. There doesn't seem to be any price you have to pay for that conversion. So that's what I would argue the proton and the electron are doing when the opposite force hits them and the force leaves perpendicularly. It's for free. Now, if you go a step deeper, into the little bit force thing, where it's harder to see because there's zillions and zillions of these little things happening all the time, you could argue that that turn took two interactions, with force on force. And so that maybe it's conservative in that sense, that it took interactions to cause the right turn or the left turn, or this way or that way. The perpendicular exit. So anyway, so it's, I'm not saying this isn't a really important subject. I'm just saying I don't think spin is something electrons have any spin. Um, they made that up with the whole Stern-Gerlach thing, and they did that with atoms, and then they just projected that somehow electrons are atoms when they're not. Electrons are dipoles when they're not. They did a lot of things that just don't make any sense. But I don't think spin is a real property in quantum mechanics. I think that property really has to do with the fact that, as I pointed out, electrons they're odd. Their geometry is odd. So instead of being a six-sided object, they're a five-sided object, which means there's no symmetry. So the six-sided object has symmetry. The five-sided object has no symmetry to the universe in the dimensions. And that electrons have the same problem. They got no symmetry, which means they're either going right or left, or they're either going up or down, or they're going forward or back, but they can't do nothing. So they're always moving in one of the six subdimensions. They're always moving in three of those subdimensions. And that's what they're calling spin. It's clearly not spin. So that's part of my answer to you. Yeah, let's see what else he says. Is fundamentally a property of its own. Okay, so the word fundamental and the word elemental. So this is where we have to, I've been doing it for years too. We have to fix this language. Because the word fundamental doesn't really say elemental. What we're really trying to say is there's some property that you can't break down, that you can't explain as being something made of parts. And so is there some spin that comes from nowhere that's just part of the universe? And I would argue that the force bits, there's no indication they need to spin, or that spin does anything, or that there's any that creates any effect for which we need a cause. There's no effect that we need to come up with a spin cause. That isn't necessary, so I don't see any reason to say there's anything spinning, because photons appear to be always the same thing, not something different. And you can't change that property with any controlling system. And I'd say the same is true for the elemental matter bits. They can only move in dimensions. They can't spin in any instant of time. So over time they can be in a circumstance where they're caused to orbit, so to speak, because of pressure, that they'll flow through a pressure field and in a round way, in a circular trap, but they're not spinning elementally. It might be fundamental to their function that they do this thing that appears to be spinny, but it's not elemental. All right, especially in respect of elementary particles such as electrons, right? So I just don't see any evidence that electrons spin. There's just no evidence that here's an electron spinning and here's an electron spinning. I just don't see where they get the evidence for that. And clearly I don't see how they can talk about an electron's magnetic moment or any of that crap, because it doesn't make any sense. They're not dipoles. There's no evidence that an electron has a positive and negative side. It's clearly the negative particle. It's not both. It's not cross-dressing, or however you want to look at it. The question then, does intrinsic spin exist in your model, or can it even emerge? Well, it's something that appears to be spin. Like I said, when something's spinning, there's nothing spinning, right? When the top is spinning, we know that it's like even the Earth going around the sun. Would you say that the Earth is spinning? Or that the solar system is spinning? Realistically, you sort of understand that, no, it's just moving in lines, it has two velocities that are going to get mixed. And one acceleration and one velocity are going to become mixed. And so you really don't say the Earth is spinning around the sun, right? And even the Earth's rotation, you make the same argument. You know that the stuff on the surface is trying to go that way. And that the force of gravity every second, every gazillionth of a second, there's little bits of quanta of energy attempting to change its direction, applying a force, and that force has to move through the object, and so there's some loss. Acceleration doesn't get you to velocity instantaneously. Acceleration has to seep into you like heat to create your velocity, so there's a dampening effect. But there's nothing in there that's intrinsic spin-like, okay? I mean, a tree sitting on the surface of the earth is not spinning, around the center of the earth. So, yeah, I don't think, I think it always has to be an emergent phenomenon, and I don't even think the word spin has any meaning in physics, okay? It's because we know that rotation is an illusion in the sense that the circle is really made out of vectors of force. That if you really looked at it, it's moving straight lines, and so it's not really spinning, it's deflecting in a redundant pattern. Now obviously the word spin is a lot easier than it's moving in a redundant pattern, a redundantly circular pattern. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's better just to spin. So I'm not saying the word has no use. I'm just saying in physics it ought to be kind of known that it's a phenomenon that's likely more complicated than anything called spinning. Yes. If something's spinning, there's something else happening. There's more to it. Kind of simple argument. Alright, I think it's probably enough. Probably. I wish there was more to, stuff, but it's just, nobody makes videos. I mean, I can't find anything to subscribe to, and everything I'm subscribed to is boring and stupid. And so it's quite depressing. And horrible. And awful. These Saturday conferences are almost unlistening toable. And then the Bill Gates is just now, he's wasting 5 videos. I mean, he's wasted 10 videos on describing the word nothing, and now he's arguing with flat earthers and still doing his thing as scientist, doesn't worry about evidence, and he doesn't do this, and he doesn't. And it's like, well, what the fuck does he do besides just make shit up then? I mean, the whole point of science is to collect evidence that your model has to fit. You have to collect dots on the paper so you can connect them. You can't connect the dots if you don't have any fucking dots. Maybe somebody could point that out in his comment section. Bill, if you say evidence isn't important, I mean, frankly, then how can you connect the dots of the evidence, in a rational matter when you don't have any dots to connect? Well, anyway, I suppose I could post a comment, but he doesn't pay any attention, frankly. So, you have to post on his Facebook or some other kind of horse shit. It's like, no, thank you very much. His Patreon or some other bullshit. So, till the next time, and such. Yeah.